So welcome everyone. So just wanted to take a little time talk about talent, about culture, about building companies. So I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm founder and CEO of Eckfeldt and Associates. For those that don't know me, and I work with early stage companies, mid-market companies, and helping them how to grow. And I've got David Reiss here. David's done a couple of things. I'll let him introduce himself in a second, but. Most recently is working with Jane, who's looking at talent and talent development, talent acquisition. And so we had a conversation the other day. I thought I would get him on the line and we chat a little bit more. So I've got some questions, but David, why don't I just give you a chance to talk a little bit about your background, how you got to doing what you're doing today, and then we can kind of get into our topic.
Great. So we had a technology company that provided enterprise software to the staffing industry. So we've been very invested in the HR technology space for quite a few years. And we want to look at some new business models. So one of the problems that we looked at was how people hire. We did a lot of research, spent a lot of money, and identified some real issues that companies had in terms of their hiring process. And then we ended up developing a web application that brought people through a very predictive, much more structured process that added more objectivity and better outcomes. And then our clients started to ask us for other things. So it evolved into an on-demand hiring solution where we actually have a group that actually drives the hiring process, does the phone screening for our clients. And now we also have a group called HROI that really goes in and helps companies internally align some of their issues organizationally to get a better outcome and greater HROI through their hiring process, and helps them, really identify some of the vulnerabilities they have in terms of talent acquisition, which obviously today's a really critical issue.
Yeah, no, it's certainly something I find, particularly really for any company, but if you're going to think about growing, making sure that you're clear on your talent strategy, on how do you onboard, how do you create engagement, retention. It's hard enough to find somebody, but then if you don't keep them, it's even more painful. So interesting. So I think, why don't we just start with a discussion, like what are some of the forces that are at play right now? So if I'm a founder, a CEO, or I'm on the leadership team, or I'm someone that's really kind of looking strategically at talent in the company, what are the things that I'm facing at this point, or one of the things that I'm probably facing if I start looking at hiring and retention?
Yes, so there are some critical issues, some of which are on people's radar, some of which really aren't. One, first of all, is unemployment is now down to 4%. So just simply the demand and supply issue is really critical right now. But the other issue that's really impacting hiring right now is the whole issue of technology and culture. And what I mean by that is, for example, Glassdoor and Indeed now have extensive reviews about specifically what is going on inside the companies from an employee perspective.
I can't tell you. I've had several clients come to me with these, like, oh my God, I've got this horrible Glassdoor review. What do I do? And it's tough. It's tough when that information is out there and people have access and people go there. People check it out before they go to interviews.
Well, you just moved us to the cultural issue, which is that millennials, first of all, they don't trust institutions, right? And what they do trust is their peers. So their reviews, these reviews are really critical to them. And one quick illustration, which I really love, is I went to DMV a number of months ago to take care of something, right? And it's the nadir experience. You're just sitting there, all these people, and I'm sitting next to this guy, and he looks at me, he goes, the reason why I'm here at this office is because I checked reviews out, and I found that this DMV site, is better than the one down in Haverstraw.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh my, if this is being used now for DMV sites, we know that this has become completely inculcated, right?
Yeah. No,
So,
it's true. People make decisions. People will drive an extra half an hour
right.
to go to a place they're going to have a good experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so these factors are at work. So, what are some of the any other factors or any other kind of challenges that you think?
Well, you're gonna see how this leads into the other issues.
Yeah.
When we start talking about, for example, employer brand issues and these reviews, we'll get into some of the other issues.
Yeah. So so let's talk. I think our original notes. Why don't we talk a little bit about technology, and then we can talk about brand? Because I think the first thing. I mean, we talked about Glassdoor and Indeed. How are these things? How are people and candidates using this stuff? Are they using it to even figure out who they want to interview for? Are they using it as kind of a prep for the actual interview itself?
Yeah, it's actually both.
Yeah.
And the very, very first thing is before they even send their if they're a top performing person. I just spoke to a business leader that I have a lot of respect for, who actually is transitioning right now.
Yeah.
And she told me that she won't even send her resume to an organization that has less than a four-star review on
Wow.
Indeed.
So they're using it as even a filter of who they even begin
absolutely
to talk to. Yeah.
Absolutely. So just consider that.
Yeah.
I talk about the movie Hidden Figures, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw it, but it's an outstanding movie about this African American woman who literally was the piece of the puzzle that was needed to bring John Glenn back from space, right?
Yep.
So there's all these hidden figures out there that are really critical to the mission of our companies.
Yeah.
And if you are screwing up with your brand as it's reflected on these sites, you're not even going to see that one piece of the puzzle. You won't even hear about them in terms of interviewing them and integrating them into your organization. They're just going to.
So you basically lose out at a whole kind of top tier of the market.
That's right.
If you're not at least at whatever a 20% top
That's
20%
right.
review.
That's right.
So and I like this idea that you sort of mentioned, this idea of your brand. How does this stuff feed into your company brand, or how do you think about it strategically as from a brand point of view?
Sure. So, people, when they think of brand, they typically think of websites, they think of images, they think of pictures. But the reality is in this area that a company is have writing the reviews that their current employees, people who are actually working for them right now, plus the people who have left them, they're actually writing those reviews through structural issues within their organization, meaning that it's almost like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, from the inside out, mm-hmm. right? Unless you're the way you actually write the reviews that people are going to be putting into your Glassdoor profiles is going to be by looking at 4 critical issues as far as I'm concerned. One is the leadership issues in your company. When you go into Glassdoor, in the leadership and the CEO. The CEO actually gets a review.
Yeah.
And sometimes, interesting, the CEO is positive, but the company is low. It's kind of negative.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So there's the leadership issues. There's the cultural issues. There are the structural issues. Things like how much you pay people, what the work-life balance issues are in the organization. And there's cultural issues, and then the last part is the hiring process itself. And those 4 things, if you're not managing those 4 things properly, that's going to actually come back and leave what I call a digital footprint on sites like Indeed and Glassdoor.
So give those to me again. So leadership,
culture,
structural,
and then the last is your hiring process, which is just as
Oh, okay.
important as the first
So,
three.
okay. So the interviewing and onboarding.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. A quick example on the hiring process. If you don't have a really good structured process, and you're not bringing people that align with your culture, or have if you're bringing in a manager and they don't have the management skills, and they start to impact whatever department or area of the business that they're in,
Yeah.
that impact will work its way actually out to your brand.
Yeah.
So the actual hiring process is the watershed event. It actually is the watershed event for everything else that we discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not even who you have now. It's who do you actually interview in the first place, and how do they
That's
move
right.
through it? So tell me a little bit about. So you mentioned this sort of management skills, but you also mentioned this idea of sort of the culture. Like how do you define? How do you kind of define the culture? How do you match culture? Like,
Yeah.
we talk about it a lot, but from a real kind of strategic recruiting or strategic sourcing point of view, how do you actually go about doing that? What is the thinking behind it?
Well, we actually build a success profile, and the first thing that we really dive into is the culture. Is it a entrepreneurial, very innovative
Mm-hmm.
type of culture? Is it more by the numbers? Is it very, very process
Yeah.
oriented company, as an example? As a matter of fact, when I was thinking about this stuff, I was thinking about your Rise
Yeah.
seminar.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, and you point this out beautifully in your material, is that cultures also change.
Yeah.
When you're in a startup mode, and it's very free flowing, right? You just need 2 or 3 people. There's no structure. Everybody has to do everything, and some people thrive in that type of environment.
Yeah.
But in the later stages, that culture is very possibly going to change, and it's going to have to become much more about metrics, about structure,
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Process is going to become much more important. So it's really important to understand where the company is in its life stage,
Yeah.
and to make sure that you're carefully understanding the culture and the attitudes that work within that organization, and that you have a way of defining that in such a way that you can actually use that as part of your screening process when you're actually going through the hiring process.
Yeah. So so I like that idea that every company has this kind of cultural fingerprint that's unique, that's a little different everywhere, and some of it's based on the people that were involved in the beginning. Some of it's based on the services and the products they develop. So now that you have that kind of fingerprint, how do you use it? Like, how do you actually use it to sort of practically screen candidates?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually really do a deep dive onto this.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we'll actually develop and understand scenarios within the organization,
Mm-hmm.
specific scenarios, and the kind of attitude and behavior, the kind of positive attitude and behavior that aligns with that particular scenario. But just as importantly, what is the negative, behavior that aligns with that scenario? And we actually will take those scenarios and we turn those scenarios actually into what we call open-ended interview questions that are put into an actual scorecard.
Mm-hmm.
And then we actually train the people who actually participate in the interview on how to do a structured, not what we call non-leading interview, because people don't know how to interview. There's this temptation to help the person there's all kinds of dynamics to get into that process that contaminate the process and really hurt the outcome.
I've seen that so many times where it's like, oh, we have a cultural value of collaboration. So during the interview, we ask them, are you collaborative? That's not going to be a very good discriminating factor.
No, so we'll design a scenario specifically around collaboration. Mm-hmm. And the candidate has no idea how they're supposed to answer that scenario. And what we want to see is and by the way, it's not like this person's bad.
Yeah, exactly.
This person's good.
Yeah.
It's just simply viscerally, do they like to work collaboratively, or are they, a person who really likes to be kind of isolated with their task and leave me alone and let me just get it done.
Yeah, the one
It,
thing I do with companies on this one is I'd make the questions. I try to make sure that we're talking about values or interviewing, that I try to make those questions such that I could flip it around and I could use it in reverse with another company and have it completely valid. So if you've got a highly competitive group and a highly collaborative group, they may use the same question, but they may be looking for different ends of that spectrum.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's great.
So. So getting that culture, not getting more than just the kind of skill level evaluation, but actually the cultural evaluation piece in there. How is that going to help us from the review point of view? So we're kind of dealing with this. I want to make sure I leave a positive digital footprint, a positive record out there in the world.
Yeah.
How does tie that together for me? Like what?
Well, first of all, it's interesting because we can say that the company has this type of culture, but the first thing you need to make sure is that the leadership and the managers within the organization are that there's no gaps, that they're actually living that culture, right?
Interesting. Okay.
So through the assessment process, we might see that there are some areas of gap within the organization in terms of actually behaving, the attitudes that actually bring alignment to that culture. So that's one thing that happens. I guess I have to address that from a negative standpoint, okay. And that is that if you have a certain type of culture and you don't do a cultural assessment and screen according to that culture, and you bring somebody in, an example would be there was a very, very collaborative culture in this healthcare organization. And the leadership was completely enamored with this very, very high level nurse that was going to be managing because of her technical knowledge. But she had no alignment in terms of collaboration.
Not a collaboration bone in her body.
Not a collaboration bone in her body. She was extremely, it was big bang. Yeah. This is how you do it. Get in line. And and the outcome, if you bring someone like that in and it blows up and you have to let that person go, it's almost guaranteed that she's not going to go back to Glassdoor and say, gee, you know what? There was cultural misalignment here, right?
Yeah.
I can describe to you what that review will look like, and it's not going to be pretty.
Not pretty. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's
she's going to project.
Yeah.
This place was,
Well, because I think, look, at some level, I think it's, it's kind of the responsibility of the employer to kind of figure those things out and get that stuff right. I mean, I think that, to expect the employee or the candidate to come in and ultimately make kind of the decision of, hey, this sounds like a great position. I just realized it's not the best cultural fit for me. I mean, because they don't know. Right, they're not going to understand the company culture like you do, and I think it's, I think it's the onus is kind of on the company to really get clear on their culture, on their values, what they really find important, what they know is going to create alignment, and then work that into the interviewing and the kind of even the prospecting process. I mean, I think half of it is it's not even just how do I interview; it's where do I source my candidates, and making sure that I'm pulling candidates that I know from the get-go are going to be culturally aligned with who I am as an organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
That's great. That's great. So where do we want to take this now? So I think we talked about hiring. We talked about, so what are some of the other mistakes, I guess, that you see companies making in the hiring process? So we talked a little about getting the values right and working that into interviewing. Are there other things that people typically get wrong or people need to be careful of?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's just this general attitude about the hiring process, right? There's this kind of, I mean, it's quite astounding that basically many organizations are hiring the exact same way organizations hired 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's this kind of this feeling that, you know, I can hire somebody, you know, I can do this process. And they really underestimate what's involved to actually do hiring well and in a way that brings out some type of predictive outcome. And what I like to say is, look, you know, hiring is arguably the most important decision you make for your organization. What's more important? You know, I mean, you know, yeah. Jim Collins talks about, you know, who's on the bus. We have all these things, right? What's more important in terms of moving the needle to your organization than the talent that you have on board? And yet, and if you think about if you manufacture something, you're going to be all over that from a process standpoint. Yeah. And if you're providing some type of service delivery thing, you know, you're going to be on top of that from a process standpoint. But there's, you know, as soon as we get into this hiring area, for some reason, everything short circuits and, just hire somebody.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we really want to talk about is, you know, first of all, you have to elevate this thing, mm-hmm. and you have to say, gee, you know, this is as important as any other process and has to be looked at that way. And today, you know, there's tools, you know, to really do that, right? You know, there's assessments, online assessments. We integrate those into our platform and all kinds of ways to make it more efficient, mm-hmm. and also to put the time and the value into the things that bring about the most critical to the outcome, right? That's what in any business, that's what we want to do, right? We want to move resources to the area that has the greatest impact, and the things that we can automate and make efficient that don't require human beings. So that's a really critical thing is, you know, how we look at the hiring process. Is it efficient? And does it give us the time to put into the areas of the process that really bring about the most value from a human interaction standpoint? So that's one issue. The other things have to just do with human dynamics, and we touched upon. You know, people hire people that are most like themselves, right? Yeah. I mean, I can see from your reaction,
bias. Yeah.
There's this incredible bias. So, you know, there's a lot of things that have to be done to offset the biases. The other issue is there's this temptation to short circuit the process because, hey, I'm a manager, I'm missing this person.
Yeah.
And I perceive, and, you know, as a manager, and this is a really important issue. As a manager, look, you know, my job is to manage the service people. Oh crap, I have to hire somebody. You know, well, you know, okay, so I have to kind of fit that in, and I really don't have time to do it. And there's so many reasons why there's temptation to hurt that part of the process. So things have to be put in place to to offset all those temptations, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that when before Glassdoor ever existed, the cost of a bad hire is anywhere from 4 to 10 times the salary of the person. Yeah. That's out there. That's published. That's the standard. So we go, gee, I have to rush and do this thing because I don't have time. And yet, if you look at the management disruption that takes place with think about, you know, who do you spend, what do you think, what are you up late night thinking about? That person that I can't bring into a line with my organization and get them to behave properly. That's what I'm spending, you know, my nights on. Yeah. So there's things that have to be done to offset those temptations, and they can be done. And when they're done, you know, they have significant impact on the company.
Yeah. I think one of the sort of stats or concepts that I really like to kind of impress upon the companies that I'm working with is, you know, when we do kind of a talent assessment, we figure out our A, B, and C players. Everyone looks at the kind of C players as being, well, you know, they're underperforming, but, you know, they're a body. And, you know, my kind of pivot on that for them is like, look, your C players are a problem, not because they're underperforming. It's because if you look at the number one reason A players leave a company, is because they have to deal with C players. So it's not that the C player is underperforming, it's that you're risking your A players leaving. And a cost of an A player leaving is huge. I would say it's even more than 10 times.
No,
But
I
so,
agree.
really dealing with that C player is strategically critical. So I think the one thing I'm curious, I think I see this all the time, right? So a company is growing, they need more people, and that's when they start looking. And they're under time pressure. They, every week that goes by is another week they're not delivering to a client. So how do you get out of that? Like how do you get ahead of that from kind of a talent planning, strategic kind of talent review point of view, and from a sourcing and recruiting process? How would you advise a company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I remember reading this Wall Street Journal article that said, that really honed in on exactly what you're saying, and basically that you always need to be hiring.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that is the answer. Yeah. You always need to be hiring. And we're actually developing more of that discipline in our own organization. You need to be, and today that's easier than ever because of social media. You can get your employees involved in that process. Mm-hmm. Still to this day, referrals through your employees is a huge source of getting good people. You still need to have a process. You can't go to sleep because someone referred you, but and in essence, if you think of all these people, developing these people that are just kind of like orbiting around your company, mm-hmm. and you're not necessarily bringing them in for a landing, but you're constantly engaging your staff in that reality, and that we don't want to be reactive with this, and just keeping them informed. And also, in a sense, always be recruiting, even when you're not specifically going to pull the trigger on somebody.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on probably the most important kind of strategic idea behind recruiting is that you're always recruiting. You're not recruiting around jobs. You're trying to create a constant flow, following of talented, culturally aligned people. And actually, if you do that well, you kind of have an abundance of talent availability, and you're just pulling from it when you need it, and it can be huge. And so we're just about at time here. I think, the other thing I wanted to just kind of key in on, because I think you've hit upon like a really interesting kind of twist on this, which is if in the beginning we were talking about, there's this challenge of kind of the Glassdoor reviews, the fact that people trust the reviews of other people more than they trust institutions. Taking this approach actually turns it into an advantage, whereas if you can build a great reputation with your people, it actually gives you a huge strategic source of talent, because people are going to, having someone recommend coming to work for a company is going to be hugely beneficial, more beneficial than a great website and great benefits package and all those kind of things. Like the recommendation becomes actually the most powerful thing to find and retain talent.
Yeah, I mean, think about literally you need to run your company, so that as you run your company, you're actually writing the reviews. Yeah, you're writing them about the structural components, your pay, your benefits, your work-life balance issues. Yeah. You're writing them in terms of the leadership that you're developing. Are you developing leadership? Sometimes there's problems, but those problems exist because someone isn't being developed and not being prepared. So it reflects on so many aspects of your business. But in essence, if you think about those reviews, it elevates almost every aspect of your company.
Yeah, that's great. So why don't we wrap it there, David? If people want to get in touch with you, find out more, continue the conversation, learn more about Jane and what you guys, how you guys help companies, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
My email is dave@jane.hr, and they can also reach me, on 845-662-4678.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll put both of those under this is the link. If people get a hold of me, you can reach me at bruce@eckfeldt.com. My website is eckfeldt.com. I'll put those links down below. Dave, this was a pleasure. I learned a lot. I hope that people watch it learned a lot, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Thanks again.
Okay.